This is the first story I've posted, so please give feedback. I might do another if people seem to like this one. Anyway, to the point. This is the story of when I lost my virginity to the girl who would become my girlfriend, and as a matter of fact, we are still doing well together. For the purpose of this story, I will change our names, just in case. So for the duration of this story, my name will be Ryan, and her name is Ji-sung. Just to set the scene properly. I am just under 6 feet tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and of German and Scottish heritage. Since my looks are not as important and hers for this, that's as far as I'll go. Ji-sung is, if you haven't guessed already, Korean, and while I'm not sure of her exact height, I have about one head on her height-wise. She has black hair to the shoulders which she dyes brown at the ends. Brown eyes, small yet firm breasts as you might expect on an Asian girl, and quite a nice ass. At the time we were both in our first year of high school, 16 years old, and in the same Japanese class together. This story takes place the last day of school, the week before finals began. Enough of the explanation, on to the good part. Now I had never been that good with girls. I always found myself getting quite nervous around them, and never quite able to talk to them with the same casualty that I talked to other guys with. All my friends were guys and girls rarely talked to me other than to ask for help on a question in class. Not to sound cocky, but my marks in high school were quite good. And even when girls seemed approachable, I still found it quite difficult to talk to them. Now, Ji-sung was an odd exception, as she was the only girl who seemed to like me. And she was one girl who I could talk to without getting too nervous. On this particular day, I had caught her looking at me at least 5 times in class that day. And each time I looked over, she would smile at me and go back to working. This had always happened at least once per class. And she would often sidle up to me as we walked out of class and talk to me about class or some math homework, the other class we had together, but today she seemed overly flirty with me. And this particular day I found myself staring at her a bit more than I normally did, as she had on a black deep V-neck sweater, tucked in at the waist to a pair of blue short shorts, and a pair of high heels on, making her legs and ass look much better than normal. When class was dismissed by sensei, and everyone stood to leave the class, I brushed away the thoughts of Ji-sung as I put my foot up on my chair and bent down to fix the laces on my boot that had come loose during class. When I put my foot back down and picked up my small pile of books, I turned around and almost bowled Ji-sung over. She was standing right behind me, and slightly to my left, a warm smile on her face. Sorry, I stuttered, blinking a few times, a bit shocked that she had come over here, and my heart was in my throat as my mind wandered to what she might want. Hey, I was wondering if you wanted to come over today to study for the final, Ji-sung said, not a hint of nervousness in her voice. And she ended her sentence with a slight tilt of her head and biting the inside of her bottom lip ever so slightly. Yeah sure, I guess, I said, continuing to blink far too much and realizing how nervous I must have looked. She smiled at me for a second as I cursed myself in my mind for being such an idiot before continuing, alright. I'll come to your locker after school, and with another big smile, she turned and walked out of the room, her hips swaying more than usual. Oh, okay, I said, more to myself than her, and as I followed her out of the room, the only though in my head was, how the hell does she know where my locker is? The rest of the day, let's just say I barely got anything done, as I was either fearing or fantasizing Ji-sung and how friendly she was being today, my mind the whole day ablaze with dreams and fears. I breathed a sigh of anxiety as the bell rang for social class and I rushed out the door, my books in hand, checked my phone as I quickly walked through the halls, ducking and dodging around the clumps of students slowly drifting and milling about the halls. And I got to my locker, nervously checking over my shoulders as I fumbled to open my locker. Only on the third time getting it, I couldn't remember what had been for homework as I haphazardly stuffed a few random binders and books into my backpack, hoping one of them would be my Japanese binder, and then quickly slamming my locker shut a bit harder than I had anticipated. "Someone's nervous," smirked my friend Joseph, who was calmly putting some things away in his locker, which was to the left of mine. "Perceptive," I mumbled to him as I turned and pulled out my phone, checking the time and my messages. "Bye-bye," he shot over his shoulder sarcastically, as he slung his backpack over his shoulders, closed his locker, and strolled away. I began to tap my foot nervously as I took a few deep breaths and checked my shirt over for any spots. I was wearing a black, short-sleeved, button-up shirt, black jeans, and black work boots. If anyone cares to know how I look, studying with a girl was the closest I had ever gotten to a girl I found attractive. So I was bursting with excitement and suffocating under my nervousness at the same time, a poor combination, and I was nervously pulling at my collar and toying around with a pen that had somehow found its way from my pocket to my hand without my knowledge. Ji-sung appeared from behind a group of students occupying the middle of the hallway, her face looking down at her phone. She walked up to me and looked up at me with a smile as she brushed a strand of hair from her face with her hand and put her phone away with the other. "Ready to go," she said with the usual big smile she had when talking to me. "Yeah, where's your place?" I shot back, tucking the pen away in my pocket. "I'd only live like 5 minutes from here. We can walk," she said, turning and starting to walk down the hall. "All right," I said with a slight smile as I caught up to her and slowed my stride a bit to match her walking speed. We didn't say anything to each other as I followed her to the southwest door of the school, staring at the floor and trying to make sure I didn't look too stupid in her eyes. "Ryan," she said, stopping with her hand on the door handle and turning to look at me. "Yeah, what?" I said, looking up, realizing I had been daydreaming about what might go wrong. I said, "How long are you able to study for?" She replied with a small laugh. "Oh, not sure. I'll find out," I said, pulling out my phone and sending off a quick text to my mother, asking if I could go to a friend's house to study for a while. Before the text had even finished sending, Ji-sung pulled the phone out of my hand and began to fiddle with it. "Your mom says you can stay as long as you like," she said with a smile, as she handed back my phone, and I saw the contact screen open, her name and number now among the ranks of my other contacts. Our silent walk continued as we left the school and off of the grounds, down the sidewalk towards her house, Ji-sung smiling the whole way at everything, seeming happy for us to just enjoy the silent company of each other with no talking. It was a warm day, the sun was out and cars humped past us as we continued down the sidewalk, me finding myself looking at her ass every time her attention was diverted elsewhere. It seemed that she caught on to what I was doing, as she turned away to look at something and about a second later quickly looking back to find me staring down her shirt, my extra height giving me a good view down her V-neck. Without talking, she looked up at me and raised her eyebrows in a questioning manner, pushing her tongue into her cheek and stifling a smile. I turned away as I scratched the back of my neck and kept my view straight ahead the rest of the walk to her house. As we got to her house, the first thing I noticed was the well-tended lawn and garden in the front, with a large array of flowers growing neatly against the house, and a pair of well-trimmed trees stood guard in the yard, planted on either side of the walkway leading to the house, which was a welcoming house, with nicely decorated windows and door, and a warmly painted roof and porch, the color of which I don't recall. Sorry, I let her lead me up onto the porch, where she pulled out a key and let herself inside the house. "My parents are both at work. The living room is on the left. I'll be right there," she said as she walked off into a side room on the right. The first 6 words of that sentence were all that mattered in that sentence, and my head instantly began to race with a new array of fantasies as I felt a bulge start to form in my pants. And I let myself into the living room and took a seat on the brown leather couch that sat in the center of the room. There was a chair flanking each side of the couch, forming a semicircle around a glass coffee table, with a large flat screen opposite the couch against the wall. And the walls were nicely decorated with an array of paintings and flower pots on small tables. A lot of flowers, I mumbled as I set my backpack down next to the couch and began to rummage through it in the hope I had grabbed my Japanese binder on the way out of school. Yup. Parents are big gardeners, Ji-sung said as she came back into the room, a bit shorter now after taking her high heels off, and she took a seat right next to me, with our legs touching. As she set a red binder on the coffee table and opened it, I managed to find my Japanese workbook and I set it on the table as well, and Ji-sung nestled up to me even closer. As I flipped to the page we had worked on that day, with Ji-sung this close to me, it became a bit too hard to control, and I had become fully hard at this point. My only cover-up being to lean forward and rest my arms against my legs, in the hope she wouldn't notice. Attempting to play it off, I tried to get right to work, starting to fill in a few blank spots in one of the vocabulary exercises we hadn't finished yet. Going to be able to focus, I heard Ji-sung say. And as I turned my head to look at her, I felt her hand grab me through my jeans, and I took a sharp intake of breath. On her face was the same expression as when she had caught me staring down her shirt, smug enjoyment. Yeah, I just, the shorts? Sorry, I stuttered, as I felt my face turn red. With Ji-sung beginning to make some ever so slight movements with her hand still holding me. How about I take care of this so we can get some work done? She said with a small giggle as she let me go and got down off the couch onto her knees. Be my guest, I managed to get out. To Ji-sung's amusement as she began to undo my fly, my full 6 inches springing to attention as she leaned in towards me. I couldn't believe it. My mind was screaming with anticipation and my heart was beating like a war drum as I tried to force myself to relax and enjoy myself. The sounds of my own heart and the dreams that flashed through my mind at 1,000 per second had clouded my vision to the fact that Ji-sung had my dick in her hand. And she was slowly stroking it up and down as she looked me right in the eye with a smile on her face. I let out a breath I never realized I was holding as she opened her mouth and plunged her way down the first 4 inches, pausing to look right in my eyes. Then slowly sliding down the last 2 inches. This was the greatest moment of my life. I could die now and have died a happy man. Nothing in life mattered anymore as Ji-sung slowly began to work her way back off my shaft and then going the full way down once more. I let out a sigh and I only found myself able to let out a chuckle at how ridiculous this situation was. Having gone from never even being hugged by any girls at school to now being blown by the cute Korean girl from my math class. Ji-sung then came back up and met my eyes, letting a giggle out through a wide smile. She took the sweater off and revealed the blue bra she had on underneath to me and tossed the sweater aside. The bra following soon after, as she displayed to me her wonderfully firm breasts. Our eyes met once more before my attention went directly to her chest. And hers went to launching a full-out assault on my dick, licking up and down and bobbing her head up and down on me with a speed and rhythm that felt amazing. It was heaven. Ji-sung would bob her head up and down as she jerked me off, before pausing for a second, breathing, and then taking the full 6 inches and shaking her head side to side. And I knew I would come in an instant if she kept this up. It must have lasted only a minute and a half, but there was no way I would let this be all. I set my hands on her shoulders and held her in place. Okay, stop, I said hastily, and she looked up at me, slowly letting my cock slide out of her mouth. Yes, she said with a huge smile as she licked her lips in a way that almost made me cum. I'm going to cum if you keep that up. Slow down, I said with a smile, and she let out another giggle. If you insist, she said with a shrug, as she stood up. What is she doing? I thought to myself as she stood up. It took me a second to realize what was happening, as I'd only thought she was going to slow down on the sucking, before my eyes opened wide and I came to the realization that she was about to let me fuck her. Ji-sung hooked her fingers into her blue shorts and the matching blue panties underneath, and slipped them down, stepping out of them to reveal a perfectly shaved pussy and a body perfect in every other way. She giggled, and placed her hands on my shoulders as she straddled my legs and held herself only an inch from my dick before slowly lowering herself down toward my cock. This was it. This was 0 hour. Here it goes. I can't believe this. This girl, this situation, this age, I couldn't believe it. I always thought I would lose my virginity much later in life, but this was a fantasy come true. My attention returned to reality as she was barely above me anymore, and I grabbed my dick and lined it up with her opening. As we came in contact, it was even better than her mouth. I felt on top of the world as I pushed my way inside. She tormented me by sliding down ever so slowly, and when she had gone all the way down, she smiled brightly and I could see the fire in her eyes as she leaned into me. Our foreheads touched first and we simply looked into one another's eyes before she pushed her lips up against mine. My first kiss. This was more than I could believe, and she worked her hands off my shoulders and down my shirt as she slowly undid each button, as we passionately kissed one another. The heat of the moment abolishing all thoughts of anything but this girl, this amazing girl, from my mind. When the buttons were finally undone, she took her lips from mine and leaned into my ear. "Pill, now don't move," she said as she placed her hands on my chest, and slowly began to ride me. I honestly had never considered the pill, or a condom for that matter. But knowing she was on the pill was the greatest news of the day. As I tried to lay my head back on the couch Ji-sung grabbed my hair and pulled my face back up face to face with her, shaking her head side to side, a devilish grin on her face. Ji-sung picked up the pace, bouncing up and down on my cock, staring directly into my face, and as the eternal seconds flew by, she picked up pace and got faster and faster, the feeling of this getting better and better every second. There was a flare of passion in her eyes and I grabbed the back of her head and pulled her into another kiss, our tongues fighting as she slammed herself into me. The noise of our love-making filling me with energy and emotion that I cannot explain if I tried. The war drumbeat of our bodies invigorating me as if I were a soldier marching to the grandest battle of his career. As she had told me, I kept myself perfectly still, every muscle of my body screaming at me to grab her and fuck her as hard as I could, but I kept my body in check. Ji-sung was moaning loudly and was beginning to squeal in a way that made my cock feel harder than it had ever been before, the warmth and wetness around it keeping it harder than rock. With one final downward beat, Ji-sung stopped, her chest heaving, her breath ragged, and she ripped her lips from mine. "Now fuck me," she said, the ferocity and excitement of her voice turning me on ever more. This was the signal I had waited for. I grabbed her, one hand on her hips, the other wrapped in her hair, and I pulled her back into a kiss as began to pound myself into her, all control lost, all measure of time forgotten, all the energy in my body, all the focus devoted to the single cause of thrusting myself deeper into Ji-sung until I could go no further. I slammed myself harder and harder into her, and we broke our kiss once again, and each took a moment to suck in enough breath to continue without passing out. I began grunting and I could feel the volcano that my body had become on the verge of erupting as I garnered every last ounce of strength left within me, and with one final, zealous strike, slammed myself into her, and she left out piercing music to my ears, a scream that never made it out of her mouth, as she pushed her lips back up against mine as a scream resonated from her throat. I felt her tighten up and I let all the pent-up energy within me to burst. It was the culminating point of the year, maybe even of my life, as I came the most I had ever came in my life. Rope after rope being let loose into her as I felt her come in unison with me. She pushed herself away from my heaving chest with her shaking hands, and with a panting laugh, slid herself off of me into the spot next to me on the couch, and grabbed my quickly softening cock, and shoved it all into her mouth, and I could feel her tongue cleaning off every bit of it. Determined to clean it, I sat back in shocked wonder and amazement, looking down at this girl, this cute girl from my Japanese class, who over the course of what seemed like lifetimes, but what couldn't have been more than 6 minutes, had transformed into the greatest girl I had ever met, a girl more important than the world. As I became soft, Ji-sung let me slide from her mouth, and she nestled her head up against my chest, her gorgeous brown eyes staring right into mine, and I let out a soft laugh as I considered the fact that this sweaty, panting, messy-haired, cum-filled girl was the most beautiful girl in the world to me. It would be safe to say that the next hour was nothing but a shower full of washing one another and touching, and more kissing on the couch, and absolutely no studying in any form. Ji-sung would a few days later become my first girlfriend, and our studying would continue for the rest of exam week, and for many a weekend of the next school year.